Machine learning models are advancing at an exponential rate, but the legal framework meant to govern them in the United States has completely stalled out. By the midpoint of 2026, the White House recognized the impending crisis, releasing its formal National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence legislative recommendations. The executive branch document explicitly asked the United States Congress to establish a minimally burdensome national standard to govern the technology industry. To achieve this, the White House urged lawmakers to invoke federal preemption, the legal mechanism where federal statutes override and nullify overlapping state or local regulations. Congress failed to act. Federal legislative action remains entirely gridlocked, creating a massive jurisdictional vacuum. Driven by immediate practical challenges, individual state governments are rushing into that void to build their own localized guardrails. U.S. AI policy has diverged from a single national standard into a deeply fragmented, highly volatile 50-state legal patchwork. Following the public release of ChatGPT in late 2022, political rhetoric focused heavily on existential threats and the science fiction risks of artificial general intelligence. State legislatures in 2026 have abandoned those broad approaches. They realize that regulating AI as a single, definable piece of underlying code is a technical impossibility. The current approach is use case regulation. States are no longer trying to control the massive foundation models. They are strictly regulating the specific application of the software. This granular strategy allows lawmakers to target immediate, localized harms without attempting to draft economy-wide bans that they have no physical way to enforce. Stripping away the theoretical rhetoric reveals that modern algorithmic regulation is driven by highly traditional forces: labor protectionism, medical gatekeeping, and corporate liability. To see how labor politics shapes this code, we look to the West Coast, where artificial intelligence has collided directly with public sector labor rights. California's massive public education infrastructure has become ground zero for union efforts to shield faculty and staff from pedagogical automation. The momentum accelerated following a highly publicized $17 million contract between the California State University System and OpenAI to provide ChatGPT enterprise access across its campuses. Shortly after, the university system's chief AI officer unilaterally deployed an AI mental health chatbot, placing it directly on a student resource page. The California Faculty Association responded aggressively, filing formal unfair labor practice charges against the university with the State Employment Board. The union's explicit grievance is that institutional administrators view scalable algorithms as a low-cost, automated alternative to hiring human educators and counselors. State lawmakers intervened to resolve the crisis by passing Assembly Bill 2148. The legislation amends the Education Code to establish the natural person doctrine. It legally restricts the definition of a public school employee to an individual human being, strictly excluding corporate entities or algorithms. The bill ensures robust labor guardrails, making it illegal to dismiss, discipline, or retaliate against educators who refuse to deploy educational technology. California is utilizing existing labor law as a defense mechanism, ensuring the final layer of pedagogical instruction and discipline remains strictly human. In stark contrast to California's labor focus, Rhode Island has adopted an aggressive, preemptive regulatory posture focused entirely on clinical safety and absolute provider transparency. The state enacted House Bill 7349, known colloquially as the therapy chatbot ban. It stands as one of the strictest restrictions on medical AI in the country. The law unconditionally prohibits licensed healthcare providers from using AI to simulate emotional attachment, bonding, or dependency with their patients. The statutory text goes further, strictly barring clinical professionals from utilizing AI to make independent therapeutic decisions or formulating clinical treatment plans. The medical justification driving this ban is the concept of the therapeutic alliance. Professional associations argued to the legislature that the foundational trust built between a patient and a human provider is ethically and medically irreplicable by machine learning. For the commercial sector, Senate Bill 2195 mandates operators integrate logic gates to detect self-harm expressions. Upon detection, the algorithm must instantly route users to certified crisis providers. Finally, operators must document these protocol activations and file them with the state attorney general. The enforcement mechanisms are severe. Violators face civil penalties of up to $15,000 per day, with all fines diverted to fund state suicide prevention programs. Rhode Island is rejecting algorithmic efficiency in favor of absolute risk mitigation, guaranteeing strict human oversight across the psychiatric field. In the Southwest, severe partisan friction and executive resistance define the regulatory landscape. In late June 2026, Governor Katie Hobbs vetoed dozens of bills in a single day, including a trio of high-profile AI regulations. One target was House Bill 2311. This legislation was drafted as a consumer safety measure to prohibit the gamification of chatbots for minors and block the generation of sexual content. Governor Hobbs struck the measure down, arguing the bill's underlying structure favored large technology conglomerates at the direct expense of consumer rights. The legislation attempted to impose severe caps on financial damages while restricting families from bringing independent private lawsuits against developers for algorithmic harms. Hobbs also vetoed House Bill 2133, which sought to mandate rigorous age and consent verification systems for commercial websites hosting synthetic depictions or deepfakes. The bill's fatal flaw was exposed during committee hearings when the sponsor admitted the legislative intent was partially to require explicit consent from elected officials before they could be satirized on television. The executive veto leaned heavily on the First Amendment, defending the right to engage in political parody and protected satirical discourse without state interference. In Arizona, technology industry coalitions and civil liberties groups like the ACLU aligned to oppose the dangerously broad statutory drafting. Arizona acts as a buffer state, proving the extreme difficulty of drafting tech regulation that protects consumers without simultaneously granting unearned corporate safe harbors or criminalizing free speech. For the software developers and multinational technology companies actually writing the code, this tripartite legal landscape is an operational nightmare. Attempting to simultaneously comply with Rhode Island's mandatory logic gates, California's restrictive labor definitions, and Arizona's shifting liability standards creates an insurmountable compliance burden. This map shows the mandatory technical response to this jurisdictional chaos: geofencing. When a user accesses the platform from a different location, the algorithm must switch its parameters, disable specific features, or alter privacy disclosures based purely on their IP address. The patchwork of state laws has eliminated the technical capability to deploy a single, unified national AI model. Aggressive, localized digital regulation, in the absence of a federal framework, carries an inevitable legal consequence: a collision in the federal courts. Well-funded technology coalitions like NetChoice are currently mounting a massive legal counteroffensive against these state mandates. They rely heavily on the Dormant Commerce Clause, arguing that states cannot regulate interstate digital trade and data flow extending beyond their physical borders. Concurrently, the industry is launching robust First Amendment challenges against state-mandated algorithmic content moderation and mandatory age verification protocols. The core legal argument is that state governments are unconstitutionally conscripting private platforms into acting as online censors under the guise of public safety. The courts are listening. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit has already affirmed preliminary injunctions against provisions of California's online speech codes based on these constitutional concerns. The continuous collision between localized algorithmic safety protocols and fundamental federal constitutional rights makes a showdown at the United States Supreme Court inevitable. Until the United States Congress actively codifies preemption and harmonizes the law, developers and institutional end users must navigate a deeply localized, highly volatile, and legally perilous environment.